The day my grandmother's estate was settled, my brother walked into that lawyer's office, like he already owned everything in it. I guess, in his mind, he did. For the past 6 years, I had been the one driving Grandma Lucille to her oncology appointments every other Thursday. I was the one who learned how to manage her insulin injections after the diabetes diagnosis. I was the one who sat on the edge of her bed at 2 in the morning when the pain was bad and she couldn't sleep, holding her hand and pretending to watch old game shows because she said the noise made the room feel less empty. My brother Conrad had been busy. He was always busy. He ran the family's commercial roofing business that our grandfather had built from nothing in the 70s, a company called Mercer Roofing that eventually grew into one of the most recognized contractors in our part of Tennessee. Conrad had taken it over 11 years ago when Grandpa passed, and by every measure anyone cared about, he had grown it into something impressive. Bigger contracts. More employees. A second location, up near Nashville. So when Grandma Lucille died peacefully at 81, everyone already knew how the story ended. Conrad would get the business. I would get whatever was left. That had been the unspoken understanding in our family for years. Not because anyone said it out loud, but because it was just how things seemed to work. Conrad was the one with the MBA. Conrad was the one who understood contracts and cash flow and quarterly projections. I was the one who had spent a decade teaching second grade at an elementary school 40 minutes outside of Knoxville. I was the practical one, people said, which I always found strange because what they meant was that I was the one without ambition, the one who had chosen a quieter life. What nobody ever said out loud was that I was also the one who had chosen to stay. When Grandma first got sick, I was 31. I had just gotten out of a long relationship and moved back home to regroup for a few months. A few months turned into 6 years. I won't pretend that was entirely selfless. I needed somewhere to land, and Grandma needed someone. Those two things just happened to fit together. But somewhere in the middle of all of it, the landing turned into a life. I transferred to a school nearby. I fixed up the small garage apartment on the edge of Grandma's property that had been sitting empty since the 90s. I painted the walls a pale yellow because Grandma said yellow made things feel like morning. I planted a small vegetable garden along the south fence because she loved tomatoes, but her knees had gotten too bad for kneeling. I wasn't performing devotion. I just loved her. And she was there, and I was there, and the rest of the family wasn't. Conrad visited 4 times in 6 years. I counted because I was the one who cleaned the guest room each time, and then cleaned it again after he left. He sent cards on her birthday. He called on holidays. He flew in for a week when she had her hip surgery, and then flew back to Memphis once the physical therapist signed off. Every time he left, Grandma would watch his rental car pull down the gravel driveway, and she wouldn't say anything for a little while. Then she'd say something like, "He's got a lot on his plate," and go back to whatever she was reading. I never argued with her. She wasn't wrong. He did have a lot on his plate, but so did I. When Grandma passed in early February, the funeral pulled in relatives I hadn't seen in years. Everyone cried. Everyone told stories. Everyone talked about Conrad's expansion of the business and how proud Grandpa would have been. My aunt from Chattanooga told me it was wonderful that I had been there to help out. One of my cousins asked me, sincerely, if I planned to move on now and find something more substantial to do with myself. I smiled and said I wasn't sure yet. A week later, we gathered in the office of a family attorney named Mr. Whitaker, downtown, on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. The conference room had a long table with too many chairs. Most of them were filled. Conrad sat across from me in a charcoal blazer, already looking like the occasion belonged to him. His wife, Serena, sat beside him, quietly scrolling through something on her phone. My parents were there. A few aunts and uncles. One of Grandma's oldest friends, a woman named Dot, who had driven 3 hours from Cookeville because Grandma had asked her to be present. I didn't know why Dot was asked to be there. I would find out later. Mr. Whitaker was a calm, unhurried man in his late 60s. He had reading glasses that he wore low on his nose, and a habit of pausing between sentences that made everything he said feel deliberate. He opened a large binder and spent a few minutes confirming identities and going over procedural formalities. Then he got to it. Lucille Mercer's estate has been divided as follows, he said. Mercer Roofing, Incorporated, including all operational assets, accounts, contracts, vehicles, equipment, and the company's current facility on Route 11, shall pass in full to Conrad Mercer. Conrad exhaled. He actually exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. The primary residence at 4 Sycamore Creek Road, Mr. Whitaker continued, along with the surrounding property, including the garage apartment, shall pass to Adrian Mercer. That was me. The room shifted. A few people nodded. A few people exchanged glances. Conrad leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, and there was a small smile on his face that I recognized immediately because I had seen it my whole life. It was the smile he wore when he already knew how something was going to go. Well, he said, not quite under his breath, but not quite out loud either. At least, you'll have a place to stay. A couple of people smiled politely. Serena looked at her phone. Conrad shook his head slowly, the way someone does when they're performing Patience for an audience. 6 years, he said, louder now, looking at me directly. You spent 6 years there, and you ended up with the house and the garden. He let out a short laugh. I hope it was worth it. I felt my face go still. My mother, 2 seats away, looked down at the table. Before I could say anything, before I could decide whether I even wanted to say anything, Mr. Whitaker set down the binder. He removed his glasses and cleaned them with a small cloth from his breast pocket. Then he put them back on. There is one additional matter, he said, that your grandmother asked me to address only after the primary distribution had been announced. Conrad's smile didn't move. What? Her collection of ceramic owls. No one laughed this time. Mr. Whitaker reached into a separate folder, one that was thinner than the main binder, and set it on the table. Inside was a sealed envelope with handwriting on the outside. Grandma's handwriting. I recognized it. Instantly, the slightly uneven loops, the way she always wrote her capital L's with a little curl at the bottom. Your grandmother left a letter, Mr. Whitaker said. She asked that it be read aloud in the presence of everyone gathered here. She was specific about that. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs under the table to keep them from shaking. Mr. Whitaker opened the envelope carefully. He unfolded 2 pages of yellow legal paper covered in that familiar handwriting. He cleared his throat. To my family, he began. If you're hearing this, then I've already gone where the tomatoes grow themselves and nobody needs insulin injections. There was a small wave of surprised laughter around the table. It broke some of the tension. That was Grandma, even now. I want to say a few things before anyone starts arguing about who got what, because knowing this family, someone already has. Conrad shifted in his seat. First, Mr. Whitaker continued reading. Conrad, you have your grandfather's hands and his drive, and that is not a small thing. The business is yours because you've earned it and because you understand it in ways I never fully did. I am proud of you. I want you to know that clearly and without condition. Conrad's jaw tightened slightly. I think he expected that to be the whole letter. But there is something I need to say about the years I was sick. There were 6 of them. They were not easy years. Some days were very dark, and some nights were the kind of long that you only understand once you've lived through them yourself. Mr. Whitaker paused, turned the page. During those years, one person showed up. Not for a week. Not for a visit. Every day. She reorganized her entire life, quietly and without any announcement, and she did it because she didn't want me to be alone. She never once asked what she might receive in return. She never brought it up. Not once. My aunt from Chattanooga was no longer looking anywhere in particular. What Adrian gave me cannot be measured in property values or business revenues. But I am a practical woman, and I believe practical gestures speak the loudest. So I want to explain something about the property I left her, because I suspect someone in that room is already doing the math and arriving at the wrong number. That was when Mr. Whitaker set down the letter and picked up a document from the separate folder. 4 years ago, he said, departing briefly from the letter to provide context. Your grandmother retained a land management firm to conduct a full assessment of the Sycamore Creek Road property. At that time, she also retained separate legal counsel to quietly acquire and consolidate certain rights associated with the land that had been held grandfather's original purchase in 1974. Conrad. Conrad sat forward. What rights? He asked. Mr. Whitaker looked at him over his glasses. Timber rights on the back 40 acres, mineral rights on the full parcel, and most significantly, development and easement rights along the creek corridor which bisects the eastern edge of the property. The room was quiet in a different way now. 3 months before your grandmother passed, Mr. Whitaker continued, she was approached by a regional land developer proposing a conservation easement agreement and a separate residential access agreement tied to a planned development on the adjacent parcel. Both agreements required clear title to the easement rights, which your grandmother held entirely. Conrad's wife put her phone down. What does that mean exactly? My mother asked. Mr. Whitaker folded his hands on the table. It means that the Sycamore Creek Road property, with those rights attached and the pending agreements in place, carries a projected value that is, conservatively, 2 to 3 times the current market valuation of Mercer Roofing. Someone down the table said very quietly, Lord. Conrad picked up one of the documents. I watched his eyes move across the page. I watched the color in his face change. Mr. Whitaker returned to the letter. I did not arrange things this way to punish anyone. I arranged them this way because the land was the most valuable thing I had to give, and I wanted it to go to the person who had already demonstrated that she understood what it means to invest in something without any guarantee of return. Adrian never asked me what the property was worth. She asked me if I was warm enough. She asked me if the pain was manageable. She asked me if I wanted her to stay a little longer. Those are not small questions. Those are the questions that matter. I was crying by then. I wasn't trying not to. Conrad will have challenges ahead. The business carries significant obligations. There are outstanding equipment loans, a line of credit that was extended last spring, and 2 large commercial contracts currently in dispute. None of that is insurmountable. Your grandfather built something from nothing. I believe Conrad can navigate what I've left him. But I want him to understand, clearly and on record, that the outcome of this reading is not accidental and is not a consolation. It is a reflection. Mr. Whitaker set the letter down. There is one final paragraph, he said, and his voice had shifted slightly. The careful professional tone softened just at the edges. He picked the pages back up. To Adrian. You painted the apartment yellow because I mentioned once, almost in passing, that yellow felt like morning to me. You remembered that. You planted tomatoes along the south fence because you knew I couldn't kneel anymore. You stayed when there was nothing in it for you except the staying itself. I hope the land gives you the kind of future you gave me. Steady, rooted, and full of mornings. All my love. Grandma Lucille. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Grandma's friend from Cookville had a tissue pressed to her mouth. She had known, I realized. She had been there to witness. That was why she'd been asked to come. Grandma had thought of everything. Conrad was still holding the document. He had not spoken since Mr. Whitaker started reading the letter. His wife had her hand on his arm now, not comforting exactly, just present. Eventually Conrad set the papers down. He didn't say anything cruel. He didn't say anything at all for several minutes. I think, somewhere underneath the shock and the recalibration, there was something that looked like recognition. It didn't undo anything. It wasn't forgiveness or absolution. But it was there. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand without saying a word. On the drive home, I took the long way back out to Sycamore Creek Road. Past the elementary school, where I'd taught for the last 4 years, past the farm stand that was just starting to put out early spring produce. Past the curve in the road where the creek first came into view through the bare tree line. I pulled into the gravel driveway and sat in my car for a while. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. White clapboard siding that needed painting on the north face. The front porch with the two rockers Grandma had kept since the early 90s. The vegetable bed along the south fence, still covered in the burlap frost cloth I'd put down before the last cold snap. Tiny green tips already pushing up through the soil near the tomato cages. I sat there until the light started going orange. Then I got out of the car, walked up the porch steps, and unlocked the front door. Not because I had inherited something, because I was home.